God, today we focus on your work in the world beyond our comfort zone. Convict and convince us to listen to your command to go into all the world and preach your gospel of peace and reconciliation. Grant us ears to hear, hearts to change, and words from you. Amen. Now, for many years, MCC has been known as the gay church. And that's not so true anymore. Even as our congregation reveals, we are so much more than that. In the last 2 Sundays, we've looked at 2 of the 4 core values which inform our ministries as an MCC church. First, we looked at what it meant to be a community of love. And last week, we took a look at spiritual transformation through the eyes of Lydia, one of the early church leaders. Today we come to social justice. For those of you who've had the opportunity to see the wonderful film Call Me Troy, you will remember the footage of our founder, Troy Perry, walking in the early LGBT marches, calling for justice and placing MCC squarely in the middle of the work for human rights for LGBT folk and for all people. This work and the work that has continued in MCC has earned us the title, the Human Rights Church. As the Human Rights Church, MCC has developed a philosophy of ministry, and this is what we believe. We believe that as Christians, we are called to stand in solidarity with those who are marginalized and oppressed, be partners in working for change, be witnesses who call attention to human rights abuses, be a voice in the international community for justice, lift up new generations, how we need this, lift up new generations of remarkable, far-reaching spiritual activists, build on hope, and create our future. Our passion for justice is built on a solid scriptural basis. We know that through the history of the Hebrew people, that God is a God of justice and righteousness. In the 6th chapter of the writings of the prophet Amos, we hear this very well-known verse. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. We know that God, our Creator, is the defender of poor and oppressed people everywhere. Jeremiah, another prophet, says, let the one who boast about this, that they have the understanding to know me, that I am the Lord, who exercises kindness, justice, and righteousness on the earth. For in these I delight, declares the Lord. Our passage from the first letter of John this morning reminds us of this again. My children, our love must not be simply words or mere talk. It must be true love, which shows itself in action and truth. This, then, is how we'll know we belong to the truth. Now, our Human Rights Protocol, which is an interesting document that our Human Rights team brought together, contains some baseline standards, and I'm just going to guess that most of you out there haven't had the opportunity to go to the web and read all of this, so I suspect it's new information. In our baseline standards, from which we can learn much regarding international and local human rights, we read this: first, to go only where we are invited, and to assume that we have a lot to learn from those who have invited us. As we listen to our hosts, we begin to forge partnerships. We always want to be able to respond when requested and to be flexible to the realities and differences in establishing churches internationally. When we let ourselves fall into the thought that a church that looks like this can be started in Pakistan or Uganda or the former Soviet Union, we are way off track. this point, and responding to cries for justice around the world. Thorough assessments are utilized to determine the potential for success, and this coincides with our attempts to learn everything we can about the culture and even the language. As we walk humbly with God in these efforts, we acknowledge that we are never more expert than the people in the communities themselves. This is not something that you might have heard other places. As we listen and learn, we forge partnerships in the region. We want to be able, and we want to be able to respond when requested. Sometimes it is difficult for us to understand the concern for safety, not only for those leading services or groups, but also for those trying to get to them in other countries. Human rights work help us to understand the culture and the issues and to build trust. Initially, our global justice work became organized under something called the Moderator's Global Justice Team of MCC. The purpose of the Moderator's Global Justice Team of Metropolitan Community Churches is to be an agent of change by building bridges that liberate and unite voices of sacred defiance. While transforming history, we seek to live the good news of the gospel. In the beginning, this team had only a 5-year vision. Among the work they wanted to accomplish was the establishment of LGBT mosques, the formation of an MCC-Social Justice Council with members from as many nations as possible, the development of a Global Justice Center with staff to provide training, and the insistence that LGBT issues be included on every table where discussions of human rights were taking place. They also wanted to work for anti-violence and hate crimes legislation on a global basis. And if you keep up with the news, you know that we are still embroiled in much of that. Additional work, and this is exciting, includes a multi-language virtual church. Because there are people in places, in very, very isolated places where we really can't get a church into, but we might could get an iPad and the ability for these folks to log into an MCC virtual church. Something amazing happened just a year ago, and some of you may remember it. Just 1 year ago at Easter, the Global Justice Institute was founded. The Global Justice Institute is a joint project between MCC and another wonderful denomination called the Fellowship. Both denominations took an extra offering at last Easter and also at this Easter and earmarked it for the development of the Institute. Fellowship Bishop Yvette Flunder commented, "We're partnering in the Easter offering campaign because justice work is Jesus' work. Whenever we stand with the oppressed, the marginalized, the rejected, the persecuted, we stand with Jesus and we minister as Jesus." And just like that, the Global Justice Institute became a reality. Just this past Easter, Open Circle contributed over $500 to the Global Justice Institute in a record-breaking year as more MCC churches participated than ever before. We are a church that is on fire for human rights and justice, whether it be at a local school board meeting or in Uganda, Pakistan, or the former Soviet Union. Even before the establishment of this institute, MCCers had done amazing things in equally amazing places. Reverend Elder Dr. Nancy Wilson reminds us all of all that we have already done. She says, "Together, we've supported our brothers and sisters across Eastern Europe as they made historic advances for religious freedom and human rights. We've joined hands with MCCers across Central and Latin America as as they trained a new generation of spiritual leaders. You have helped plant indigenous ministries in Southeast Asia that are challenging injustice and intolerance. And your gifts continue to provide support for lesbian and transgender communities in Pakistan. You helped underwrite the first LGBT conference in Russia and published the first book about LGBT rights in the Russian language. You helped create safe space for Ugandans who face daily threats to freedom and life. And you made it possible for MCC to boldly march in the first ever gay rights marches in places such as Jamaica and Romania. The purpose and charter of the Global Justice Institute is impressive. As our voice, all of us, as our voice in the world, the Global Justice Institute intends to serve as an umbrella organization to efficiently and most effectively carry out the social justice ministries to which MCC has been committed since our earliest days. And they intend to create a safe space for spiritual activists who are fighting homophobia and transphobia. They intend to effect societal change through a three-pronged strategy of theological reconciliation, economic development, and positive press coverage for LGBT people. I think we contributed to that just a little. Serve as a joint ministry of MCC and the Fellowship, the Global Justice Institute, will provide solidarity and support where people are still marginalized and persecuted. I'm sorry. They also want to carry out its work while embodying the core values, mission, and principles of MCC that we've already begun to study. Here's where it gets really exciting. The Global Justice Institute is seeking to form partnerships with the indigenous organizations. And in countries where there are LGBT organizations but no spiritual voice, they are trying to forge partnerships with those folks so that it's not coming from an outside source, it's growing from within. They want to continue to build on what MCC has already accomplished in Pakistan, Uganda, Eastern Europe, Jamaica, Asia, and so many other places. You may remember Reverend Nancy telling us that there is an MCC church now in Cuba. Think about that. Cuba. There is an MCC church where people regularly attend every Sunday. The Global Justice Institute knows that we are doing our work in a world which encompasses, among other things, volatility, violence everywhere, a growing gap between the haves and have-nots. There are advances in human rights, but there are also escalations of violence and a loss of culture. Indeed, violence is commonplace, something that has to be dealt with on a daily basis. And we also need to understand the pluralistic concept of religiosity. That would be phrase, I don't know why they put that in there. In other words, we need to understand that not everybody worships the way we do. Not everybody believes the way we do, and that becomes so important. We also know in the world that there is escalating fundamentalism. Our community particularly knows what the outcome of escalating fundamentalism is. In fact, they seem to be funding some of the violence, and we have an increasing need for attention to global warming. There's an increase in anti-Semitism and racism. We have corporations dominating the economies of whole countries, leading to poverty, and HIV is still on the rise in many places in the world. Let me tell you one final story of what your funds may well have done. Uganda remains one of the most challenging environments for LGBT people to live open and productive lives. Mala currently rents 3 acres of land and employs 13 people, some gay and some straight, who work together for the common good of their families and villages. The Global Justice Institute is partnering with Male to extend his business and his opportunity to hire more workers. Our investment of a mere $1,500 will allow Male to rent 2 more acres of land, hire 6 new workers, 4 of whom will be members of the LGBT community of faith we also help to support, and put a new roof on his storage barn. With the new land and new workers, Male will be able to increase his production by 66%. I believe that we will continue to make a difference as MCC churches throughout the world. And I pray that God may honor our efforts and increase their effectiveness. Amen.